Today's lesson, we're talking about the kingdom Protista, the Protist Kingdom. This kingdom is one of the more interesting ones just because the organisms in it are so unique. So here's what you're going to need to do. You're going to watch the video with the with your characteristics of life notes that you got from the archaea and bacteria lessons. Here it is. And you're going to use the notes during this video to fill in the column where it says protists. We're going to learn today about what kind of cells they have. Are they autotrophic or heterotrophic? How do they reproduce? What kind of species are out there? And I'm going to throw in some videos to show you how absolutely unique some of these organisms are. Today's lesson is on the Protist Kingdom. It's one of my favorite kingdoms to take a look at because it's just really a unique kingdom. Do you have a junk drawer at home? You know that drawer that is at your house that contains the ketchup packets, maybe some batteries, an aux cord, maybe some spare change, paper clips, staples, but no stapler. In fact, you don't even know if your family owns a staple or a stapler. Yeah, that's what this kingdom's like. The Protist Kingdom is sometimes called Kingdom Protista, Protista being Latin for protist. And it's also sometimes considered the Water Kingdom because, yeah, you guessed it. All these organisms live in water. So the Protist Kingdom doesn't have animals in it. It has animal-like organisms. And it doesn't have plants. It has plant-like, and you guessed it, it doesn't have fungi, but it has fungus-like organisms. What are these organisms? Well, let's take a look at an animal-like organism in the Protist Kingdom. This is called a blepharisma. It is a ciliate, which means it has special hairs on the outside, and it is a gorgeous-looking protist. A plant-like protist could be something like this Volvox. This Volvox is it is a plant. It makes its own food. It lives in a colony of other Volvox. And we have fungus like this slime mold that acts like a fungus. It breaks down dead and decaying organisms, but it is not fungus enough like to be in the fungus kingdom. The Protist Kingdom is the first kingdom that we are studying that is eukaryotic. Not an organism like bacteria and archaea that are prokaryotic, not having a nucleus. Eukaryotic organisms, like the protist, have have a nucleus inside the cell. And a nucleus is the control center of the cell. Nuclei, the plural of nucleus, are in complex organisms. And these organisms, like protists, fungi, plants, and animals, have this nucleus, and the nucleus inside the cell contains all the genetic information. It works like the cell's brain, telling the other parts of the cell what to do. All this will be studied later on when we get more in depth with our lessons about cells. All right, protists obtain energy in multiple ways. There are animal-like protists, and there are fungi-like protists, and they are heterotrophs. They consume other organisms for food. We also have plant-like protists. Plant-like protists are autotrophs, and they produce their own food using sunlight or photosynthesis. But then the Protist Kingdom steps it up because they're not the normal type of kingdom. And there are organisms that are both plant-like and animal-like. This is an example of one. It's called a Euglena. And a Euglena can move around and swim and catch its own food, but it also has chlorophyll that can make its own food as well. Most protists are unicellular, but since nothing about the Protist Kingdom is typical, there are also multicellular organisms as well. So for the vast majority of protists, you will find that they are single-celled. But for things like kelp, red algae, and brown algae, they are multicellular and are made up of many other cells. All right, let's talk about protist reproduction. Reproduction is mostly asexual. One parent organism is needed, and they go through a process called binary fission, where the protist copied its genetic material and then basically split itself in half to create two organisms. But nothing about the protist is typical, and there are some that use sexual reproduction, two parent organisms exchanging genetic information, and we call this type of reproduction conjugation. But for the most part, protists are asexual. The protist habitat is mainly in the water. That's why it's called the water kingdom. Most protists live in water and in all types of water, fresh and salt water, ponds, lakes. Where there's water, there's probably protists. Some of the most fascinating thing about protists are the way that some of them move. For example, some of them have flagella. Flagella is a whip-like tail in some organisms. Like right here, you can see the stringy like appendage coming out of the back of those protists. For our example of a protist with a flagella, we're looking at a Euglena. Euglena is a unique protist that is both heterotrophic and autotrophic. You can see that whip-like tail in the back helping that Euglena move. It also is able to move with that forward and backward motion that you see it stretching itself out with. Other protists have cilia. Cilia are hair-like structures on the outside of the protist. For example, take a look at our friend here, the Euplades. The Euplades has hair-like structures on the outside that do things like gather food or move the protist through the water. The first protist I ever learned about was this one here. This is a Paramecium. The Paramecium has hair-like structures on the outside of it. You can see them moving there. They will help the Paramecium move around and gather food. Some organisms have a pseudopod, which pseudo means fake, pod means foot. So this fake foot moves cytoplasm around in the organism. Here is an amoeba. It is full of cytoplasm, a jelly-like substance inside of the protist, and when it wants to move, it propels that cytoplasm in a certain direction. Right here we have an amoeba, and that amoeba is slowly creeping around what looks like possibly a paramecium, and it's going to use that paramecium for food. You can see how the amoeba is pushing its cytoplasm in a certain direction, and it's engulfing this other organism. There are all kinds of different types of protists. Scientists have classified and found over 100,000 different species of protists. Some examples of those are the ciliates, the ones that have hair-like structures on the outside. Slime molds, the fungi-like organisms. One of them is famously named dog vomit slime mold because scientists got creative naming that one. There are algae, your green, your red, your brown algae, and then there are amoebas, pseudopod moving organisms that are full of cytoplasm, and all four of these types of examples contain many other named organisms inside of them, and we will be studying some of those in the future. All right, they are truly some of my favorite organisms to study. And usually in the labs, we would have about 15 to 20 different examples of these that we'd be looking at underneath the microscopes. We're going to have a lab that allows us to look at some very unique organisms a little bit later on. But right now, what I'd like you to do is to make sure your chart, the Six Kingdoms characteristics chart under protists, make sure that column is all filled out. Here is that sheet again. Use that sheet. It's inside the bacteria and archaea folder. So you need to, if you haven't gotten that yet, which you should have, go back and get that sheet, watch the archaea and bacteria videos, and then continue on with the protists and fill out those charts.